Very, very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to this very special event this morning. The 10th of December every year and also the 11th of December are usually observed as Human Rights Day, and it is because of this occasion that we are here together, and also because there is a film to be seen which addresses a very, very important issue.
সন্তান আমাদের সন্ধান, মৃত পৃথিবীর পুনর্জীবন, কন্যা ও পুত্রের শৈশব, আঁকে আগামীর আমন্ত্রণ। ওকে বড় হতে দাও ওর ছন্দে, বিবাহ তো পরিণত ইচ্ছে, এসো চিহ্নিত করি অপরাধীদের, যারা শিশু কন্যা বিয়ে দিচ্ছে। এসো বুক ঠুকে রুখে দাঁড়াই, যদি কেউ শৈশব কেড়ে নিতে চায়, সেই অপরাধীর শাস্তি চাই, যারা শিশু বেচে সমাজের অছিলায়। এসো বুক ঠুকে রুখে দাঁড়াই, যদি কেউ শৈশব কেড়ে নিতে চায়, সেই অপরাধীর শাস্তি চাই, যারা শিশু বেচে বিবাহের অছিলায়।
Right at the outset, I would like to invite Mrs. Astrid Weger, the director of the Goethe Institute, Max Müller Bhavan, Kolkata, the premises in which we are all sitting at this moment, to address the audience and say a few initial remarks about the event today.
It is a privilege and a great pleasure to have you all here. Welcome at the Goethe Institute Max Müller Bhavan in Calcutta. It is exactly 1 year that I have been here now. I arrived on December 11, and at the time I wasn't aware of the fact that it was exactly the International Day of Human Rights, celebrating the 10th of December, celebrating the declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. So this document is the most translated document or text ever. And I think it is still a very pressing, very important text which we all have to refer to and address to. And I'm very pleased that this event, that we can host this event of the Consulate General of Germany here on our premises, and that we have distinguished guests, the filmmaker himself, but also panelists, distinguished guests who will discuss and address the issue of human rights.
And for all of you in the audience who are wondering, who is this gentleman who has gone up in front and has bestowed upon himself the human right to address this audience, I would like to say my name is S.V. Raman. I say Sugar Victory Raman. People know me as Raju Raman. And I have been given the honorable duty of taking you through today's proceedings. I would now like to request the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany in India, Mr. Manfred Auster, to kindly address the audience. A word or two about Mr. Manfred Auster. He is the German Consul General in Kolkata since September 2020. So he has been here for over a year and about 3 months.
It is the launch of a movie, of a documentary that we are going to hear quite a lot about later on, and we will watch it. Documentary that is addressing the human rights violation, in particular the trafficking in persons, and here in particular also the trafficking in women and girls, which is one that unfortunately is one of the severe problems that we have faced in many parts of the world, but also in our region here. It nicely fits to not only to the International Day of Human Rights that we celebrated yesterday, but also to the end of the 14-day period of Orange the World, or actually 16 days Orange the World campaign, which is directed to the fight against fighting violence against women and girls. Orange the World is something that has been also launched by UN Women, and we are proud supporters of that as well. The documentary Malaise of Mankind is meant to raise awareness for the problem. And we have several target groups there. On one side, those people who are dealing in their everyday life with it as law enforcement, as administrators, as parents and teachers as being perhaps a go-to spot for some of the potential victims. But over and above of that, the idea is to have something out there in the net, but also in a campaigning together with the Sukriti Foundation to go out into the countryside and to raise the awareness of young girls before the fact. So we hope that we can contribute to setting a kind of thinking in motion where women and girls will recognize first signs of something that will and can end in disaster for them, and so that they shrink back at that moment and take a moment to think, is that really a genuine offer, an honest offer that someone is making, or is there something more about it? And it should get us to a point, or should get these women and girls to the point where they say, my gut feeling is I better beware. And if I'm not sure and it still sounds enticing, then I go and talk to someone about it and reassure myself. And these people are again to be found in the group that I mentioned earlier. Those teachers, for instance, parents, lawmakers, whoever you find in a small community, so that they can go there and get reassurance for their suspicion, getting reassurance to step back and say, well, as promising as it sounds, it probably is not valid to risk my life for that. So to conclude, I would just very much like to express my sincere thanks to all those involved in this project, my colleagues at the consulate, Sushmita Mandal, who has been very hard working with the Sukriti Foundation on that, Isha Malhotra, who is looking after the press relations on all that, but also, of course, our director, Abhijit Dasgupta, for all the time and personal efforts that he had really invested in this movie, and we have followed these efforts along the way. The work started already early this year, and it turned out to be a larger project than originally anticipated, and we are very proud that we could contribute to that. And last but not least, to all of you who are here today to take that interest, not only taking that interest into it, but as I said at the beginning, who are also active in the fight against all kinds of human rights violations, in particular also the trafficking of women and girls. And with that, I hand it over back to you, Mr. Mann. Thank you very much.
Mr. Shoibal Kaur is the RBI Chair Professor of Economics, currently a professor at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, and a research fellow of the Institute of Labor Economics in Bonn.
I'm deeply honored to be part of this discussion. And my first thanks must go to the director here, the Honorable Consul General, and of course, Sushmita, who talked me into this program. I was a bit skeptic how much do I really can contribute, how much can I really contribute to this very deep issue, particularly from an academic point of view, because as I was kindly introduced by the chair here, I do research in economics, essentially in labor economics, and my entry into the subject actually came from issues about illegal migration. And incidentally, as it had to happen, I was in Hawaii at the time when I first started working on illegal migration pertaining to Germany and also some of the European countries, as also my persistent interest about the Mexican-US illegal immigration of the sort. But this is a much deeper issue, and particularly when you see a documentary like Mr. Dashgupta has presented here, and it's an enormous contribution, and I would just, for the first 3 or 5 minutes, I would like to explain why a practitioner, economist, or a social scientist would find this as a very enriching experience, because I really thank you for that. The kind of exposure we had about the theories of it. And of course, we do come across a lot of numbers, we see data. I have interacted with Malady on this issue because she has worked on labor migration, particularly refugee movements in Bengal for a very long time. We have also spoken in women's issues in women's department in Jadavpur at some point. And I still find that there's so much more I should have known before I wrote a few papers in this area. I've shared it with Shushmita. If some of you are interested, you could have a look at it, because these are essentially non-technical reading, some of those, and some definitely are inclusive of the kind of models that economists typically do. But I would think that this has given me the scope to understand the problem better, because there are so many players in the system. If you pardon my use of the word players, could be agents. The administration, the individuals, the parents, the households, the kind of incentives and cross incentives that goes on to keep this problem a really vexing one for a lifetime exercise to analyze and understand and prepare a set of policies which could at least give us some hope about bringing it down as much as possible. So what I feel, if you'd like to take my indulgence into the core economics of it, there are certain issues which are deeply economic about it, right? So I mean, the poverty, the entrenched inequality in the system, the inequality of access to so many things have been the major drivers of what we see in the documentary and what we have known from the literature. And there are many people who have written on the literature. Professor Marcel Thum is in Dresden. He has written a lot about illegal immigration and trafficking of women and children, as also several United Nations report, like Ms. Chakraborty actually said that it's the third largest economic crime in terms of the turnover on an annual basis. So United Nations projected something like $40 billion per year. That's basically changing hands owing to this kind of activities going in not only in the developing countries and not, of course, in West Bengal alone, because this is a problem of India, this is a problem of many other countries, because this is a joint host country and a destination, or a source and a destination problem. Whether it is within a country or whether it is across countries, as it happens with South Asia in particular. I can give you some numbers top of my head, that it's South Asian countries including India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bhutan all are subject to this kind of issues. And in some cases, as the popular 3P measure of United Nations goes, prosecution, prevention, and protection, India often scores pretty low in those rankings. So there are, I can explain it to you. There are like, under protection, it's like a 5-point scale. For prosecution, it's a 5-point scale. And for prevention, it's a 5-point scale. On most years that I have looked up, according to the All India data from Crime Records Bureau and some other sources, India never scores more than 10 or 11. Whereas in some cases, Bangladesh even scores more than 12, more than 13, particularly on the prosecution aspect, which has come up again and again in this issue, that we are not finding appropriate solutions from the administration in some cases, which is almost the legal aspect of the administration. There is no dearth of interest and kind of proactive measures taken by the government at many times. The implementation at the stage, the interaction between the law enforcement and taking it to the level of prosecution, where it could really get some kind of an adverse feedback on the perpetrators, is not really working. So prosecution has to be much better in terms of bringing the incidences of these kind of things somewhat lower to our liking and what we deserve as a social for a welfare scheme or a welfare measurement of any nature. So I would think that on one side, we have also been exposed to a large literature which is, largely Western in its flavor, that there is some degree of voluntary participation into both running away from your home and getting exposed to such risky activities and behavior. You know, and there have been Bengali films, and there are filmmakers here we definitely can remember. There was a film called I Love You, Deb. So it was more like, you know, a girl running away from her home to meet a film star in Kolkata, and of course, you know, she manages good enough to you know, kind of circumvent the problems that she sees around her neighborhood. But when she comes to Kolkata, she's easily picked up by a trafficker, right? And that's the source of the problem, which in part is the aspirations of the people to become, you know, somewhere in the news, in the live, in the world of glamour and so on and so forth, which is completely misleading, particularly from very young children who are not equipped to handle this kind of issues. And the other part is, which is I would think 90% of the problem, is economy, right? So extreme poverty and parents selling their children trying to do something in order to support their families in some way, trying to find a job elsewhere, and then easily getting trafficked in the process, is a difficult task to, you know, make a policy out of easily. So I think people like me would be working more and more, if not on the field, because I might not have the kind of exposure or the experience to do that in person, but definitely in terms of sensitizing, in terms of making a policy document which is acceptable to different governments or local agencies. Sometimes even the Panchayat Pradhan needs to be to understand things much better than what they kind of report from time to time. And this is a little I can contribute to this very engaging you know, issue, and which of course remains a critical problem for both growth and welfare. As you know, one of the interviews said that if the doctors could explain why childbearing below 18 is actually physically impossible, as well as, you know, causing certain economic problems which lingers through generations, you know, those are definitely part of what economics literature often handles in terms of health economics, in terms of labor economics, in terms of the core development economics. And I would try to engage more and more with this. This is my humble submission to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Shoibalkar. We will move on in that same order to Professor Paula Banerjee, best known for her work on women in borderlands and women and forced migration. She is the president of International Association for Studies in Forced Migration. She is a faculty member of the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies, University of Calcutta. Earlier, she also served as a vice chancellor of the Sanskrit College and University, Kolkata.
First, one corrective, and that is, I hate the term illegal. Let's call them undocumented, which is a more politically correct way of saying, I don't want to be completely PC, but you know, it has its value because human beings are not illegal, and their movements are not illegal because Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948, which is the source of a lot of human rights declarations, say that people have a right to nationality and people have a right to move. 3 days back, I was contacted by another consulate, embassy actually, from Delhi to do something or say something on trafficking, and it's always about the footfalls in Europe. You know, how many people are coming to Europe? How many undocumented migrants are going to Europe? How many of them are trafficked? And I keep telling people it's not just a question of numbers. You know, numbers lie, and you can manipulate numbers. So, you know, there's no point in looking at numbers, but, you know, Obhijit Babu did us a service by bringing a very cold question again to our attention. There are a couple of things which I'm sure Obhijit Babu knows and all of us know, but I want to remind people, and that is trafficking, people who've been trafficked are not just victims. You know, it's always good to have a story where people are crying, heartstrings pulled and everything, but these are some of the women who are extremely resilient. And, you know, I think their resilience comes through. They are survivors. And unless we bring out their stories of survival, it's doing a disservice to these women. Then there are a couple of things that we have to realize. Some of them has to do with the problematic of cross-border trafficking. That is, you know, I have worked in 6 different jails in West Bengal. And I did it for a long period of time, again, talking to people who've been trafficked. Why is it that among, let's say, 100-odd women that I interviewed, only 2 people pointed to their traffickers? We have to, understand that we are somehow failing this. The system is somehow failing. If people consider traffickers to be more their ally than the state system or the legal system, then there's something wrong in the system. And the other thing is, we constantly say people are stolen, girls are, young girls are stolen. 70% of people who are trafficked, whether boys, girls, or anyone else for that matter, are actually sold by intimate partners or people that they know or people part of their family. So, this is certainly not an anonymous face who's grabbing people and sort of taking them into trafficking. A lot of these people know that they're going to be trafficked. Why do they agree to being trafficked? This hits the core of the problem, and that is this total apathy to girl children that has survived in much of the world, and definitely in South Asia, is something, if we don't address that, we will not address this question of either smuggling or trafficking or, doing anything with, bettering the lives of girls who are, allies in this, who are not victims lying there and we sort of give them doles to make their lives better. No, they are active partners in this entire process. The other thing that has to be remembered is this gray area of trafficking for labor and trafficking for sexual purposes. Often enough, this is a very, very gray area. A lot of these people go as laborers and then they slide into the sex industry, because look at what COVID has done. And the reason why pandemics, climate change, etc., affects these people is because primarily it is not their being trafficked that makes them vulnerable. It is their vulnerability that leads them into the hands of the traffickers, smugglers. Because if a woman or if a girl has a family where 2 other children are starving, what is their capital? Their body is their only capital. And they will use it. Rather than dying, they should use it. And for that purpose, I would say that, I've been telling Boitali, I don't know whether she's here or not, for a long time, that it's important for us to make people migration ready, to tell them, it is a question of securing their rights. It is a question of giving them justice. It is not a question of handing doles to people. So we will have to make young girls migration ready, because we have seen after this COVID, when migrant workers have come back in scores, that, fathers died or could not go back. That's when adolescent girls are now waiting to go to some other place for work, and they will be trafficked. Unless we make them migration ready, it is impossible to do that, and there has to be intergovernment collaboration, whether on an international level or on an internal level, and I'm sure our Chief Minister will be amenable to this idea, to talk to other chief ministers and to see from where their origin points are and where their destination points are. And they should have some safety nets in the destination points, because girls are not without support system. We should make that support system. We should decriminalize the process of movement so that, that takes the wind away from criminal traffickers. And there are a whole host of things that can be done. And, that is why I hate it when we constantly talk about victimization of these young girls. They're not victims. They're very resilient. And I think my 3 minutes are over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course, Paula Banerjee has right away started off by pointing that migration per se is not an illegal act, but it is an act that is not documented most of the time. That she might even go to the extent of saying that migration is a fundamental right of every human being. And among the 100-odd women that you came across, that only 2 were able to identify the perpetrators, only 2 were willing to, shows the might and the clout that these perpetrators have, which possibly goes beyond the machinery of the state And that is a thing that needs to be looked at. So we move on to Mr. B.D. Sharma. Mr. B.D. Sharma, a botanist by training, a musician by heart and soul, and a recipient of the President's Medal for Distinguished Service, B.D. Sharma is a retired IPS officer of the West Bengal cadre. During his career, he held positions like Superintendent of Police of Murshidabad and South 24 Parganas districts, DCP of Kolkata Police, DIG of Border Security Force at Jaisalmer, IG in Jammu and Kashmir, the DG of Sashastra Seema Bal in New Delhi, and as the Inspector General of Correctional Services in West Bengal, we all know about the yeoman's kind of service that he has done in different areas, different sectors. It is not unknown to all those people who have been living in Calcutta.
I start off with one or two observations as a police officer. I used to be SP of 24 Pargana South, and which was one of the most badly affected districts from the point of view of trafficking. And in those times, it had just started out. Maybe it was there, but then not that big a problem as we dealt with it. But gradually, it has only increased. Now it has become a menace, and as has been rightly said, it is one of the 3 biggest organized crimes throughout the world now. After drug trafficking and arms trafficking, well, human trafficking is a very big problem, economic offense as well as organized crime. I worked in police. I worked in Border Security Force. As ADG Border Security Force, I was in charge of the entire Indo-Bangladesh border. And then, of course, as DG of SSB, I was in charge of Indo-Nepal border and Indo-Bhutan borders. So this problem has been there in all these areas. Our state, West Bengal, is certainly is a source, transit, as well as even destination. So there are problems. There are very reasonable, very valid complaints about the criminal justice system. We do make a lot of claims in the, those who are working in the system about our successes, but then the successes are very few and far between. Fact remains that we are not able to do as much as the society expects us to. The problem of the police is that they have to deal with law and order and also the investigation of crime. As we all know, law and order has become the main priority of police in all states of India. So is the case in our state also. And therefore, the crime investigation needs the efforts at the crime investigation needs to improve. And for that, maybe additional manpower. And all those issues are there, which probably there's no point discussing here. The government has to decide about those things. But there is one important point which I think we can make some recommendation about, and that is the lack of coordination regarding trafficking, prevention, detection, and investigation of crime between the center and the states. The international borders are a huge issue in Indian subcontinent. Indo-Bangladesh border, more than, I think it's almost 4,000 kilometers. Nepal border, 1,700 plus kilometers. Bhutan border, Pakistan border. All these borders are being manned by Border Security Force, Sashastra Seema Bal, and they don't have issue of manpower as the police has. But yet, somehow there are problems there are tension and between the states and the tension between the states and the central forces, central institutions, and they are not able to give out their best because of that. So I don't know how best it can be addressed by the governments together. This is a very big issue. You have at the district level these committees under the chairmanship of district magistrates now, but somehow the representatives of these central forces, Border Security Force, SSB, etc., they don't very comfortable working with these committees and all. So those issues also need to be addressed, apart from the investigation and the restoration, rehabilitation issues. One more thing which I thought I must make here is regarding the intimate relationship between the trafficking and the legal and illegal migration. They are all mixed up. And this problem is getting more and more complicated because of the mobility, human mobility today throughout the world. So again, things have to be addressed both by the central government authorities and the state government authorities together. And investigation of these cases is very, very difficult because a person is taken from one state to another state, and then has to be rescued from places like red light areas and all, and then brought back. Now it is not possible for the police force only of that one state to pursue the investigation to its logical conclusion. So all these things taken together become a huge, huge problem, and it is difficult to really get great amount of results in the investigation. We need to also think about that and make some good recommendations in times to come through various seminars and workshops and all. And we need to also look at the rehabilitation aspect. I happen to go to Kathmandu, and I've seen some most beautiful work being done by Mighty, Mrs. Anuradha Koirala there. Absolutely unbelievable, because I don't know if such stupendous work is being done by any of our NGOs in India. Anuradha Koirala has done a great amount of work toward the rehabilitation of the victim survivors. The one more little suggestion which I thought I'll give here is using the survivors for prevention of future prevention of the crime, which we used to do. What we used to do was, when I was DG SSB, we started a program in collaboration with these NGOs, especially Mighty, Nepal, and our boys, SSB boys, would take the joint training with the workers or volunteers of the Mighty, and we would also do checking of buses at night alongside the volunteers of Mighty. So these girls who were themselves traffic survivors, they would know better than our boys, the officers of the SSB, as to who could be possibly a victim, a potential victim. And they used to really be very useful. So some such program can also be thought of in our other parts of the country and the state police forces also. That would be a wonderful thing. And participation of NGOs has been a very, very great thing, of course, in the rescue efforts and rehabilitation efforts. Great amount of work is done by is being done by a lot of NGOs and social organizations and also other governmental organizations. So these are some of the one or two points which I thought I'll make in the brief introduction here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. B.D. Sharma. Sudeshna Roy is a consultant, State Commission for Protection of Child Rights. Ever since I got to know Sudeshna in the year 1978, and I'm not mistaken there, when she did the role of Antigone in a production that we had done from the Goethe Institute. And right from then, we knew her as a person who protests against injustice, not only in her role in the play, but also in real life. And this has manifested itself in various forms in the kind of creative pursuits that she has followed, like the films she had made, So Sudeshna, if you could say what you wanted to say now.
Thank you very much, Raman, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, Obhijita, for allowing me to speak here, though I was not part of the panel, but I have a few points to make. And thank you to Goethe Institute, it's still called that, isn't it? Frau Wege and her Auster, who's involved with the film as well, as I saw. There are a few things that I just want to point out. Nothing very, something that will change the world, but just a few things if we could notice. Yes. It's a big problem. Like Mr. Sharma said, it's a problem that has escalated. Yes, it has. Why has it escalated? Have we ever thought about it? It has escalated because we are aware. We have got to know. We often hear people saying that, oh, in our childhood, you'll find the earlier generation saying, rape wasn't there that much. Trafficking wasn't there. It was, only it never came out in the open. Now, we are coming out in the open, and the fact that you have acknowledged that, thank you. And that you are trying to make people aware that this menace exists, thank you. There is a small thing that you must remember, the population also. We don't ever think about that. The population of Assam is 3.6 crores, and the population of Bengal is 10.17 crore, and 1/3 of that are children who are being trafficked. So when we top the list, the entire population of Assam and our children population is the same. Therefore, we often make these derogatory statements, or we often feel that we are not doing enough. The fact that people like Abhijita are making films, that means that we are ready to face the music. We are ready to make this part of our lives. We are ready for redressals. There are, like Ananya had pointed out, there are, Paula ma'am pointed out, there are lots of cases where the traffic survivors have done something. I work for the Child Rights Commission. We at the Commission are now asking children to give us their opinion, the voices. Their voices are being heard. We are having a seminar of 40 trafficking survivors who are below 18. They're going to come and let us know what we should do and how we should combat. I am not going to comment on the BSF or borders because we know at times what happens during trafficking. I don't want to go into that because this is not a place for that controversy. But what I'm trying to say is there are ways and means, and we are working and we are facing the fact that this is the truth. And that is what is important. But there is a silver lining. There are lots of people who are, like Abhijita, feeling that we should do something. We just want them to come forward and do something. Go out in the field and see. While I was watching the film today, yes, all through I was watching, but sometimes I was a little unmindful because I was messaging on my phone, asking a boy how to write an FIR. Well, we can do that. Yet I can tell you whatever was said in the film. So if we want, we can do it. These observations, because I feel very passionately about trafficking, child marriage, and child marriage is a way of trafficking. And like Paula said, we have faced it that sometimes these trafficked women who are in the sex trade don't want to identify, and they feel that this is easier money. It is true. I just want to end with a story that I heard one of the sex workers telling me, and this was 10 years back, not recently. 10 years back, I was going to one of these seminars, and this lady was taking me there. It was in one of the red light areas of Kolkata. So this lady, I was talking to her, she said she worked in the cooperative bank in that red light area, and she worked there from 10 to 2. She was in her mid-30s and quite well-dressed, just like you and me. And not even that extra bit that you see in those red light area shots. So I kept asking her about her life, and she said she had been sold by her father when she was 9, and she said, in a way, I think my father did the right thing, because at that point of time, I didn't get 3 square meals once I came here. And I'm talking about 2010, so she must have been sold 20 years before that. So I asked her that, what happened after you came? So she said, I was here till I started my puberty and menstruating. I was kept, and then the day I was started menstruating, after that I was sold off to the highest bidder at that point of time because I was a virgin. And then my profession started, and I've been working for 20 years, and I have got both my sisters married. I've got my brother's bribery money for a job, and I've done everything. There's a house at home, and I'm here now. So I asked her, don't you want a house of your own? Don't you want a family of your own? So she said, I'm seeing my sisters. They get beaten up for what I get paid for. So if that is what the resilience is, and recently we did raids where after that, when the girls were brought to a home, to a rehab, they wanted to leave the rehab. They wanted to go back to their homes, to their red light area. They did not want to stay or be rehabilitated. So therefore, what we have to do is to instill in girls, instill in families, instill in people we still haven't, that women are not burdens. Give them that kind of dignity so that they can stand on their feet. They can think, they can resolve, they can be resolute. Thank you.
Right. We move on to Dr. Sarfaraz Ahmed Khan. Dr. Sarfaraz Ahmed Khan is an assistant professor of the School of Criminal Justice and Administration in the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. As a British Chevening human rights scholar, he did his LLM in International Human Rights at the University of Essex, United Kingdom. He was also a recipient of the International Visitor Leadership Fellowship by the US government to attend a program on anti-human trafficking in the USA.
I congratulate Mr. Abhijit Dasgupta sir for making such a beautiful documentary with facts. I just wanted to give a simple figure which suggested by the Global Slavery Index, which someone may agree, disagree, but the fact is there's a huge number of trafficking, and according to them, 2018 report, 9,89,000 modern day slave in India. And just I wanted to just calculate what could be the figure if hypothetically we say that, okay, if it is correct. ILO report suggests that out of those forced labor, 22% are for there for sexual exploitation, so for prostitutions, basically. So that figure, again, if we comes to a particular figure, so, from there, if we come to the figure of a minor, then there is a study conducted by Center for Social Welfare Board, and this says that the 14.9% of total women, those who are in prostitution, they are minor. If that correct, then we have 2,61,879 approximately minors who are in prostitution, who are forced into prostitution. If we calculate that all those minors undergo sexual exploitations 5 times in a day, it is almost 12.5 lakhs rape. In the POXO word, it is penetrative sexual assault, which is happening throughout the country. Now, if the figure is hypothetical, but even if the reality is half of it or 25% of it, we have lakhs of rape which are happening every day. And these rapes, we are, as a society, we are tolerating. Tolerating in the sense that there's no reporting, no one can report. It's all we call dark figure of crime. The crimes are there, but no ways in which it can be brought forth, or there is no way in which we can prosecute, because there will be no evidences who can bring forth all those issues will come. But the facts remain, there are offenses, these are dark figure of crime. When we got the bill recently to 2021, a bill was suggested by Minister of Women and Child Development. There are few good things because they suggested for state level, national level, district level bodies, which may help in providing support. There are many things which are non-acceptable. But then again, the bill remains silent on addressing the demand side of the issues. how we can deal with it, how we can address the demand, the industry which I was saying, the industry which are visible, it's not hidden somewhere. If we know there is a red light area in a state or in a district or in a city, and any new exploitation in that state, the government definitely become party because of their failure of due diligence. If suppose Sonagachi is there, in next 1 year, if there's 100 trafficking there, 1,000 rapes there, definitely state become party because of the failure of due diligence. Had this exploitative industry was not there, might be this number of exploitation would have been less. So what we can do, I'm just few pointers which I just wanted to suggest at this point of time. That in my view, our perspective must be very clear. In my view, we must adopt the sexual exploitation approach. That means the women in prostitution, so children in prostitution, they are victims. We have to treat them as a victim. We provide them support. We provide them compensation scheme. We can provide them some kinds of maybe pension schemes where they can get some support throughout their life once they gradually withdraw themselves from there. So we have to adopt sexual exploitation approach. That's one side, which include that we have to criminalize the demand. Unless we address the demand, we will not able to combat trafficking. Howsoever good work we do, we have to challenge, we have to see how the demand can be addressed. B, we have to end this toleration of violence which happening against the women, violence against women, irrespective of whether such exploitations take place in red light area or in cage brothel or any other places. So we have to change this attitude. The thing which we are tolerating that, okay, the things, these red light areas are there, maybe some others are safe. These are the places which generate this exploitative industry, which are there, generate more exploitations. We require more adequate resources, financial resources for the people, for the women who are there. More schemes. Pension schemes could be there, other funding should be there. Those who wanted to gradually withdraw, let we provide them every kind of support that they cannot be re-trafficked or they ever willing to go back in that conditions, because the support system will be that enormous, which will be more attracted than going to that exploitative life. If we are in comparisons, our support system is not that attractive, they will attract to the exploitative life and not your alternative what you are offering. Next is the fixing state accountability for failure of due diligence and provide reparations to victim. Because every single trafficking which happened, whether it's Sonagachi, GB Road, whatever may be throughout the Kamati, Pura, Etwari in Nagpur, any places which are there where this perpetuating the number of trafficking, exploitations, rape, there are states of due diligence failure because their eyes are closed and new women and girls are exploited day in, day out there. And if the state has failed in due diligence, then definitely state has an obligation to provide reparations. That reparations include that full support to those victims for bringing back in earlier conditions. So these are the few initial remarks from my side. Once Nelson Mandela said that for to be free is not merely to cast off one's chain. It's not only that remove our own chain, but to live in a way that respect and enhance the freedom of others. Hope we all contribute in making India free from slavery by changing our attitude from tolerance to intolerance. So the tolerance which are having today in the respect of these exploitations, we need to end it, we need to change it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. We move on to Ananya. Ananya is a national award-winning documentary filmmaker and a journalist, and so much so that her earlier incarnation has been as a filmmaker. And Ananya has specialized in trafficking and other gender issues. Prior to her present position as chairperson of the State Commission for Protection of Child Rights, she was a faculty member of the Department of Mass Communications at St. Xavier's College, Kolkata.
Thank you, Raju. It's always a pleasure being in the same panel with you because of your wit, if nothing else. And thank you, Goethe Institute, and thank you, Shushmita, for inviting me, and of course, Obhijita. I'll start, I'll take off from what Paula said. I completely agree with her about documented and undocumented migration. I think migration is everybody's right. We have all migrated from somewhere. Our parents migrated from somewhere. None of us were born in wherever we are living now. And migration is a right, and because migration gives us an opportunity to look for a better life. So we cannot deny anybody, even a small girl in a village, the right to a better life. What is important is, if I again take off from Paula, when she talks about undocumented migration, I would say informed and uninformed migration. Because when it is uninformed migration, it often leads to trafficking. So it is the duty of everybody, of all the stakeholders, to make migration safe, so that women are not controlled, women are not held back in the pretext of safety. When we take a kind of an approach which is more towards rescuing or saving the girl, we end up ensuring that the girl doesn't go out of the house, that she stays at home, that she stays in the village, that she continues to have the life that her mother has had or her grandmother has had. And often that life is not exactly the best, even though in our middle-class morality, being married off is the safest and the best method of life. But we know that it is not true. We know that marriage is not the best of places always for a woman. We know that domestic violence is one of the most, the commonest forms of violence on women, and which is never talked about. Very, very few women talk about it. Even empowered women don't talk about it. So therefore, the first thing that we need to do is to, as she said, we have to empower women, and also what Shudeshna said, we need to empower women. B, we need to make migration safe so that women can go out to work. Thirdly, we must encourage families to allow women to go out and not tell them that keep them at home because it's not safe out there. We have to make it safe out there. We have to make the passages safe and not force the women to be at home and be caged in a false notion of safety and security. You know, there are, when we talk about trafficking and when we talk about sex work, often we tend to take a very moralistic view of it. I have a problem with that. There are many schools, there are two very prominent schools on trafficking. One is the GATW, one is the CATW. The GATW school is about Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women, and CATW is anyway, I'm just not getting it, but yeah, it's the other school. So GATW is in favor of legalizing prostitution because they say that in order to empower women, you have to legalize prostitution. Why? Because not all women who come into prostitution are trafficked. There are many women who flee from abusive marriages and get into prostitution knowingly. I have worked in the field of trafficking for many years, and I've spoken to many women in the red light areas, and many of them have told me that I faced such a lot of violence in my married life that I fled from my home, and it's better here. At least I am paid for it. So we have to understand these basic differences about being trafficked into prostitution and getting into prostitution. Yes, if she had a better choice, if the choice was between becoming the Prime Minister of India and becoming a prostitute, of course she would choose differently. But we have to make those choices available for these women and not look at them through the prism of middle-class morality and assume that they are poor victims. Yes, even housewives are poor victims. A woman who is forced to stay within a marriage and get beaten up every day and run her family with great effort and put up a very brave face and say that I'm very happy, even she is a victim. So we need to first get out of this middle-class prism of looking at things and stop looking at women into prostitution as poor victims. Sometimes they are more empowered than many of us. I would just like to end by one little thing that, when I was making a film on children of sex workers many years ago, about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I was shooting in Sonagachi. There was, they used to run these adult education classes there. And there was this wonderful gentleman who had written the textbook for sex workers. And that book I find fascinating even today. So the first chapter of that book was called History. Now, when we talk of history, we think about the Mughals and we think of India's independence and et cetera, et cetera. But that book started with, it was an interactive book. The first interactive book I had come across, it was 25 years ago. She had lost her father. Her mother used to do odd jobs to keep their family running. She had many sisters, brothers and sisters. They were very poor. One day, an uncle from the village told her that, come with me to the city, I'll give you a job. So she was taken here to the city and sold off in the brothel. And she has lived here ever since. And then the teacher would ask all the girls who are sitting there, now tell us your story. How did you land up here? And this is your history. This is the history that will be your history. It doesn't have to be about the Mughals or about the Pathans or about the Taj Mahal. The second chapter was even more interesting. It was about, the second chapter was about independence. Now, when we talk about independence, we of course think of 15th August and Gandhiji and so on and so forth. The second chapter was that Sita is married. She has a daughter, but her husband doesn't give her any money. Geeta is a sex worker. She lives in Sonagachi, and she earns so much every day. Now, between Geeta and Sita, who is more independent and why? So then the girls were asked to come and speak on who they thought was more independent. So one of them said, of course Geeta is more independent because she earns money. And then the other one said, yeah, but she earns money, but she has to give up so much to the police, so much to the local henchmen, so much to et cetera, et cetera. So she has very little left for herself. Besides, she can't put her children in a good school because everyone asks for the father's name. So then another person would come up with something else. They said, okay, then we want right to go to school, and we want the right to enlist our child in the school without the father's name. These kind of things. So I think these debates are very important. When we are discussing trafficking, when we are discussing empowerment, it is not just giving out doles. It is not just having government schemes, but also bringing these into the fore. And I end with one thing that, a lot of the missing and trafficking cases now happening are cases of elopement. Children run away. Why do they run away? Because they are in love with somebody, and if the parents come to know, they'll forcefully marry them off elsewhere. So parents need to be counseled that children will fall in love. We were all 14, we were all 15, we were all 16, and we'll all be lying to ourselves if we say that, no, we didn't fall in love, we didn't have a crush. We all had crushes. It is normal, it is abnormal not to have a crush when you are 16. You will have a crush on somebody or the other, there's nothing wrong with it. So if a villager finds his daughter or her daughter under a tree with another boy talking or speaking intimately, and suddenly realizes, oh my God, what is happening, and drags her away and marries her off elsewhere, then that will lead to elopements. So in order to kind of prevent elopements, and which can often also lead to trafficking, we also need to sensitize the families, the parents, and thereby, I'm talking about a large-scale social awareness. And empowerment has to, of the women has to come from society, from families, and from the establishment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ananya. We move on to our next panelist here, and of course, that is Dr. Kunal Sharkar. Dr. Kunal Sharkar is a surgeon with a difference. You see, many people accuse him. He says that he cuts hearts left, right, and center. So he's a person without a heart. But if in Calcutta you can come across one person with a heart and also with a terrific brain, that is Dr. Kunal Sharkar.
Rajuda, thank you. A couple of words, first of all, thank you, Abhijit. Thanks to the Goethe Institute, the German consulate for inviting us. I have a confession to make, as you all were sitting in the auditorium and watching the film, because Abhijit did not want to have an unemployed surgeon in his hands. He had allowed me small electronic snippets of the documentary because I couldn't be here, because had I been here for another 2 hours, I would have most certainly been on the dole by Monday, right? Now, we've had a different kind of, I've heard the word Shunagachi mentioned so many times that I rewound myself back to the late 80s. And in the late 80s, when we were sweating it out in the casualty of College Street Medical College, Calcutta, which happens to be the first modern medical college of Asia, I was just recollecting, we used to treat about, on an average, couple of slash wounds from Shunagachi every evening. Every evening. Later on, some of them would bleed like a pig. They would be brought to us. We would have stitched them. Some of them were pretty fatally slashed, because with an intention to finish them off. One of them, with the very primitive equipments we had in medical college, we managed to save, because she had actually come with the carotid partially severed. Later on, when we moved over to plastic surgery, we had developed quite a following, because all these women with healing scars would queue up in the plastic surgery OPDs, wanting their facial scars to be minimized or removed. Most often we could not. And many of them, after a few initial visits, would not come back because they were not there anymore. They would commit suicide. So we were not too far away from what seems to be the proscenium of action that you've mentioned so many times. And we've seen it in our formative years from a slightly different perspective. We've mentioned the word, you see, I would have a little bone of contention with Dr. Khan that humanity has been around for 120,000 years with about 10,000 years of recorded history. And ever since you've had the Code of Hammurabi, you've had slavery, prostitution, everything embodied in there. It is a mixture of the hormones and the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And I beg to differ with you, Mr. Khan, Dr. Khan, no legislation can take human sexual proclivity, the animals in the human beings away. Slavery, trafficking, we are discussing it in the individual perspective. On what we discuss today is the very edifice of the postmodern European civilization. Without slavery, without mass-scale human trafficking, without commodification of human life, there would not have been a post-industrial revolution European affluence as you know of today. Each and every European city, institution, from Europe in the west to Hong Kong in the east, stands on two things. That is a banal, naked exploitation of human labor and commodification of the underdeveloped parts of the world shamelessly. You got the words Goethe written over here. In the middle of in the early, mid, and the sort of 18th century, when this ebullient, fascinating German polymath was flowering in his field of work, represents the peak of human history when human exploitation reached its zenith. And should you have the slightest thirst to know about that phase of human history, pick up a very thin book right now, Amitabh Ghosh's The Nutmeg's Curse. Go through it. Read through every page. Read through every syllable. And end reading the book with a little bit of regret that our lives, our civilizations, and our values are based mostly on things which we did not want to do. Is it very germane to the genetic code of what we define as civilization? The question remains, it is a little bit like discussing COVID. We are discussing the same respiratory pandemic under a different technological lens, under a different time lens. You know, when you had the last pandemic, you didn't even know what the virus was. Electron microscope only came in 1930s. The last pandemic had ended 10 years before that. So we are discussing essentially the same problem in a different time perspective of history, technology, and probably in a different interpretation of human sensitivities. As we had legalized every unethical act of human exploitation right through 500 years of human history, today we do the same thing with criminalization of politics. Today, very knowingly, with the hands on the heart, we go on doing the same thing when every political manipulator reduces law and order and police force to just a phalange of state coercion. You cannot have implementation of humane-based law and order when every law and order instrument is just a tool for furthering your narrow-minded political goals. It is simply not possible. Objectivity of social considerations is still not flowered in the society the way you and I want it to. Let us not pretend. Morality cannot have compromises in grayscales. It's not possible. That is the real life we exist in today. We've discussed a lot of things about Bengal when I've seen few snippets. You see, we've got to live with the burden on our conscience that 74 years ago we created a creed of people who did not exist before, and that creed was called refugees. Under the pretense of nonviolence, you created a country which almost sacrificed 15% of its population either through loss of life or through malignant dislocation, through tremendous loss of property. And because that coincided with our phase of colonial impoverishment, we will definitely take time to emerge from that. Our society will definitely take time to emerge from that. I refer you to one document. You've referred a lot of things. About 10 days ago, the Niti Aayog, for a change, this government, I'm not a great fan of it, has come up with a wonderful study, because it has a fair amount of academic content in it. It is called the Multi-Dimensional Analysis of India's Poverty. It's called the MDS Analysis of Indian States. It values Indian states on 3 basic parameters. One is health, secondly is education, third is standard of life. And you'll get a fair bit of synopsis that out of the 30 Indian states, who is doing what, if you follow it over there. And as the discussion pointed out repeatedly, border areas, border districts, still remain very, very vulnerable as far as all these basic ingredients of human life and living is concerned. We are focused on India, correctly, we should be. But remember, the second biggest economy in the world, China, is as vulnerable to human trafficking as any other economy is. One of the countries with one of the highest individual GDPs of Asia, Thailand, it runs like a viral pandemic over there. It's almost like a statement. It is almost like a substance addiction that Thai society cannot turn their head away from. They are still living out the legacy of the Vietnam War. All the flesh trade and all the sex trade that you see in Thailand, what is that a legacy of? That is a legacy of post-Viet Cong imperialism. That is what that country is paying its toll tax for, because they were a naval base for the Americans for God knows part of how many years. So we have to live out and we have to make penance for our respective histories. We've got to recognize the phase of history in which we are in. And commenting on Abhijit Das' film, I think it's a very wonderful sort of portrayal. And if we are aiming for social justice and so on, just have two comments to make. One is fundamental, as Professor Kort said in the beginning. I think we go back to that old bearded fellow called Karl Marx, another German in question, that the basic truth of life is perhaps economics. You've got to address this until we are in a position to identify the needs of a person and needs of a society. We've identified religion, we've identified caste, we've got 17 different subcategories to whose backwards and forwards, but we still do not have a unanimous recognition of who is the true economically impoverished. We do not have the clarity of vision to recognize that. We are still besotted by differentiating the majority from the minority, the presumed backward from the presumed forward. And we are still we are a prisoner to our vote bank politics. So unless we emerge and transcend and allow our courage of conviction to show in our social policies, these problems will linger for a fair amount of time. I'm extremely, we have to be in recognition of the fact that this has been recognized. Remember, there are many hotspots of trafficking apart from India. Look back, probably today Ukraine's only problem is not just President Putin. Ukraine's main problem is protecting its women. I think it's an insult to a society like that. I mean, two spots which are almost made a kind of fashion statement out of their, they've put them on the sexual pedestal for the world. One happens to be Thailand, the other happens to be Ukraine at this point of time. And the world is almost immune to it. We've almost accepted it as a given. So as we are aware of the conditions which are aggravating this problem in our country, I think, first of all, identify the people who actually need our help. Let us take away the tinted glass, the sort of bias forever of religion, caste, backward, forwards. Reach out to the people who are truly vulnerable with the economic help, with the educational help, where it is most needed. I think these probably awareness is coming. You've talked about women marrying before the age of 18. When we became independent in 1947, the average life expectancy of an Indian woman was 35 years. So the Indian women did not have a chance but to get married somewhere between 15 and 16, because you would get married first. Then, like you have the chemistry experiments, you would go through an experimental pregnancy, and you would be tested out, because the commonest cause of death in Indian women was childbearing. They did not live long enough to get a disease, to fall sick. And if you survived childbirth, fair enough. You did not childbirth, okay, theek hai, you were disposed of like a disposable God knows what, and you got married again. So that is why you have the upper class marriages, and that is why you had this thing, but I'm sure we are getting over it. So first of all, let people in law and order be given the opportunity to implement what they need to implement. All the government expenditure on social support and financial support should reach out to the people they are intended to reach, and not just be at every stage a political lubricant to get you 3 more seats in the next state election. Because India now has to learn to look beyond the political myopia. We are taking steps. I think we are correcting. And we don't have a choice but to be brave, but to be bold and be critical and face up to problems like this. And one more problem that you have not mentioned today, probably that will be a different issue for a different forum, is to discuss organ trafficking someday at some other forum. Thank you.
That was a lot of ground that you have covered after just a peek preview of snippets of the film. You have brought a lot of issues to the fore, and of course, been politically correct in a way also, that believing in the adage that if you're in Rome, do like the Romans, that if you're in the Goethe Institute, invoke Goethe and Marx also. We would wind up proceedings here, but not before I request Mr. Rovijit Dasgupta to come up and give a few closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. At the very outset, I'd like to thank the Consulate General in Calcutta for funding this documentary. It is not easy to get a fund. We at Kolkata Shukriti Foundation, we produce a socially purposive documentary every year, and I know how difficult it is to get a funder. Today, funds come in easily if you do a dance show, but this wasn't a dance show. So I would particularly like to thank Ms. Shushmita Mondol and the Consul General, and of course the Goethe Institute for this lending us the hall and the projection. Two things I would like to tell you about the making of the documentary. You know, people who have made documentary would bear with me. There's a quote of Hitchcock which says, for a feature film, the director directs the feature film. For a documentary, God directs a documentary. That's Hitchcock. God directs a documentary. It wasn't very easy, especially with COVID, with all kinds of restrictions, you know, get crew vaccinated, RT-PCR tests, going to North Bengal, stop going to North Bengal, get RT-PCR tests, 48 hours, postpone, go again. Then you see that the survivors have vanished, you wait, and indefinitely, all those things happened. Another thing I would like to share with you is that I came into the media world in 1963 as a trainee. In 1971, I was the youngest war correspondent, accredited war correspondent, covering the Bangladesh war. There are two kinds of war correspondents. Either you go with the army and see what the army tries to show you, or you go alone and you get your independent view. You know, except for Ananda, none knew I was doing this documentary. I know statistics tell you that with your head in the oven and your legs in the refrigerator, on an average, you will be very comfortable. I know all that. I'm quite aware of it. And I have worked in the government for 22 long years, and I know how to play with statistics. I have played with statistics. But statistics I showed here are none of my creations. They are either National Crime Records Bureau or newspaper publications. The problem is we are not making people enough aware so that people could stand up and protest against media playing with sad, mad, and bad only. Where is GLAD? GLAD is missing. This is the problem. The problem is here. When I was station director of Doordarshan, you know, I used to get invitations from NGOs. They would invite me to come and speak. After 2 or 3 or 4 invitations, they realized that when this guy comes, the crew doesn't come. They stopped inviting me. And all those invitations were to 5-star hotels. They would have long discussions in a 5-star hotel, followed by dinner or lunch or what have you. And they would invite me, hoping that the Doordarshan crew would come and cover. And I made sure that Doordarshan crew will not go if I'm there. So they stopped inviting me. So that's a fact of life. So when I started my NGO, I made sure that we don't want publicity. 2, I want to share this with all of you, is that in our NGO, we don't have a single paid employee. Not one. Everyone does voluntary service. Okay? Yes, they get paid professionally if they work professionally. Okay? And the last thing I want to mention is a request. This documentary, it's good. We'll put it up on YouTube, we'll promote it on Facebook and all that. But we need a video van to go into remote villages and screen to make people aware. Not us living in Calcutta. You know, out there, they should see it. It is in Bangla, so there is no reason they'll not be able to follow it. A video van, you know, I'm sure all NGOs would love to have a video van, you know, going there, and they will gather, they will have 200, 300, you know, school children and, you know, secondary girls. They would come and watch. They'll become aware. I need a sponsor for it. Someone should come up and sponsor the video vans. I think it's a necessity. Doing a film is one thing, taking it to the mass is another thing, and making it, you know, we in media, we call it the take-home factor. Unless we have a take-home factor, it's useless. We have to have the take-home factor. Where is the take-home factor? Unless we can reach the target audience. The target audience, not you and me. The target audience are the vulnerable group. They have to be targeted, and we must reach them. So that is where I need your help. I need your blessings. Thank you very much.